Okay, hello and welcome. My name is Nick Harrigan, or Nicholas Harrigan, or just Nick, and this is SOC224, Methods of Social Research. And this is one of two videos that I'm putting out today. The reason for this one, which probably you should listen to first, is it's really more an admin video. It's sort of an introduction to the structure of the course, and some of the key important things for in the unit guide and so forth. Please do pay attention to this, because hopefully almost all of the really key, gradable information will be in here. Okay, before I get into the admin, however, I want to deal with just a couple of things. And the first one of those is, why do research methods? I think that we have to be honest here. Research methods is a course which unfortunately has a bad reputation amongst most actually lecturers and students across most universities across the world. However, I'm going to make a promise to you that this class is going to be different. The reason it normally sucks, to be honest, to do research methods is because it's a whole lot of going through concepts and learning definitions, and not really a lot of actually practice and applying things. In contrast, in this course, it's pretty damn exciting, and the main reason it's exciting, well, there's a few reasons it's exciting. One of them is simply that you get to do your own project, and you go from beginning to end. You design it, you pick the topic, you design it, you go and do the data collection, you do the analysis, and you present it and write it up. It's a fantastic opportunity. I've been doing it in Singapore for 10 years, and students there have absolutely loved it and got so much out of it. So I hope it will be the same for you guys. Number two, what I try to do, and if I don't, push me, is to give you really practical examples and exercises that are very practical. We're going to look at some of the best examples of research from around the world, and as we go through the lectures and do the exercises, and I think that practical edge to it really will make it quite exciting. Okay, so my promise to you is this is going to be a different course, a different way of doing research methods. But why do research methods? I want to argue to you that there are three big reasons why you are doing research methods, should be doing research methods, and you're going to get something out of it. Number one, research methods is something that basically teaches you how to do all your other classes at university really well, right? We actually teach you about pretty much every article that you ever are going to read at university is the application of one of the research methods we learn this week, in this class, and you will understand those papers so much better once you understand the process of design, data collection, analysis, and writing up that has gone into almost every one of those papers. On top of that, we will teach you really practical things. Everything from how to do analysis. So if you do have some data, you can do some pretty sexy analysis like thematic qualitative analysis or statistical analysis and do some nice graphs. You'll get some of those skills. You're going to learn how to write and write much better and clearer. And you're also going to, let's leave it at that. So number one, it's going to make you better at your other classes. Number two, you get to do your own project. I've already talked about that, but the scope of it is probably going to be unlike anything you've done in any other class. I would say you we've got a focus which is on studying low wage workers in Australia, but that is an incredibly broad topic. It covers about half of the population, and there are many different aspects of it that you can study. And what you're going to get to do is do a real original data collection. That I imagine and an analysis, and that will be a very satisfying experience. The third reason why this class is damn good, but it's one of the reasons why I think you will get a lot out of it, and many students do, is it really is the basis for many interesting jobs. If you want a job where you get to basically use your brain and do things like conduct research, then this course is fundamental to it. It's also fundamental to upper level studies at university when you're going and doing masters or PhD or an honors thesis. All these upper level parts of a unit or like graduate and thesis style work in a university or in a degree, these are built around and really just the application of the skills you're going to learn in this course. Okay. So there's some reasons, some things you might get out of it. Before we get into the final structure of go into the formal part of the lecture, I just want to say one last thing, which is that the way this class has been designed, it's been designed to try to help motivate you and also to help you to really learn. And I think I just want to explain some of the rationale behind these things, and then hopefully you will see them as we go through the structure. So it turns out with human motivation, whether it's for work or a study or hobbies or whatever, there are three really important things. You need purpose, you need control, and you really need to get better at it over time. And these three things I've tried been built into the course overall. We try to talk a lot about why we are doing everything at each step, like we are doing now, and that gives a sense of purpose. The sense of control, well, that comes from having control over various aspects of any job or study, and in particular you get that with the research project, but also over many of the exercises. And then the last thing that makes anything from learning to work motivating is when you develop mastery. Mastery is when you get better at something over time just by doing it. So basically it's how practice actually is rewarding because you actually get better at whatever you're doing. And this is one of the main reasons why lots of people enjoy their hobbies, whether they're cooking or gardening. They just get better at it over time, over years and years, decades and decades. Well, you're going to see that in this course because we're going to learn the fundamentals and we're going to then apply them to some examples and exercises, and then we're going to apply them in real life in your research project, and you will really see mastery developing. Okay, that's that. That's that. As we're learning, I want you to remember that really you're learning three big things in this course. You're going to have to master some facts, and that's the sort of learning the key concepts that we're going to be going through. You're going to also you're also going to have to be able to apply those concepts, and we're going to learn a lot of that through examples. And then the last thing you're going to really learn through this the way you are going to learn in this class is through the research project. And so one of the reasons why that works, at least according to the academic literature, is simply that strenuous, realistic practice is one of the absolute keys to learning. Anyway, that's my long introduction and didn't have slides, so But let's get into it and let's talk about the slides that I have got for you. So today we're going to go through in this lecture 3 things, and I'll try to move through it quickly so I don't bore you. We're going to start off by talking about the structure of research overall, the structure of a project. We're then going to talk about the structure of the course, and then I'm going to overview some of the very important sections of the unit guide in iLearn. So let's go into it straight away. So the structure of research. It turns out that the research process can be thought of as sort of like a cycle that goes through step by step from design to data collection to analysis and writing up. These steps are in some ways really obvious, and at other levels are really not so obvious. If we jump in to the first section around design, we can see here that this is basically what we're going to do in the first. Well, on the left-hand side, when we're going, the methodology, topic, and theory is actually going to be the basis of the lecture. The next that actually is for week 1. Ethics we're going to cover in week 2, and then with respect to the methods, we are going to cover each of those over the weeks 3 through to about 8. So very briefly, when you're designing a topic or when you're designing a research project, we can think about some of the things some of the key concepts. One of them is, what do you consider social science to be? And we call this a methodology, and it turns out within social sciences there have been many different debates around what's the purpose of social science. There are positivists who basically see social science as like the natural sciences, something that should just be objective and scientific. There are interpretivists who see social science is about trying to understand the meanings that we create, our norms and our values, and this is a much more often qualitative approach. And then the third approach is what we call critical social science, and this is basically a much more politically activist orientation, or organized around the idea that social science should expose myths, the delusions and the illusions that the powerful have about the world and that they may inculcate into the rest of the population, the myths that maybe that people feel that make them comfortable, but really are not true. So you can see here that when you start off the process of design, often one of the first things you need to ask is, who are you as a social scientist? Is social science about being scientific? Is social science about much more about relationships and how people make meaning and interpret the world? Or is social science about some sort of activism and exposing corrupting ideas? Okay, so that's methodology. That's what we call those 3 different ways of understanding social science methodology. We can also think about when we're designing a research project of how do we pick a topic. We're going to go into much more detail about this in the next lecture, or the second lecture for this week. But basically, it turns out that it's hard to pick a good topic, and we're going to learn about how we can do that. Things like, how do you pick an important topic, or how do you pick a topic that is interesting and that's debated and that is a puzzle? It turns out that there are lots of ways to understand that. There are lots of techniques that you can learn and apply. We're also going to learn very briefly, and we'll keep coming back to this also, but about the idea of theory. This is really, another word for it is explanations about the world. And in that, we need to get on top of that, we need to learn about doing a literature review. We want to learn about drawing out what I call causal diagrams, which is sort of like or a path where we can represent social processes with like dots and arrows. And we're also going to learn about making hypotheses at a conceptual level, sort of at the level of ideas, but also hypotheses at the operational level. In operational meaning hypotheses you can measure. Okay, that's some of the stuff we're going to cover this week, and that's week 1, first part of design. Next week we're going to focus in on ethics, which is crucially important. It's sort of obvious that ethics matters, but in research it matters a hell of a lot. We're going to learn about some of the principles that all ethical research is based on. Principles like the fact that humans should give consent and have autonomy over their lives, that researchers should do no harm, the Hippocratic, which is the Hippocratic Oath, that humans should try to do good. Researchers should try to do as much good as they can. That researchers should be fair in distributing the benefits, so we don't go and research the poor and then make medical breakthroughs for the rich. And also we learn about one of the key aspects of ethics or considerations, which is simply the issue of privacy. That thing that we all have the right that we all have to keep certain parts of our lives out of the public view. So those are some core issues around design. The other main part of design is the various methods that exist within the social sciences. It turns out there are a few big distinctions. I'll tell you the biggest distinction here is actually between qualitative and quantitative. And so when we're talking about methods, try to understand that the words sound very similar, qualitative, quantitative, but they mean very different things. Qualitative comes from the word quality, and qualitative data means words or images, things that basically can't be broken down simply into numbers, but instead stay as words and images when you conduct analysis on them. Qualitative data looks like things like in-depth interviews, focus groups, ethnography. Ethnography is where you go and basically live with a community of people for a long period of time and keep an extensive diary and then write up about your experiences. But they're also and the last one, which is what we're going to do actually in this course, is do open-ended survey questions. So we can, rather than ask people how much do you earn, a quantitative thing, you can also just ask people, why do you feel that way, or why did you make that choice? That's an open-ended survey question. So we have this distinction, qualitative, and I've talked about 4 qualitative methods, and qualitative is contrasted to the other major types of methods, which we call quantitative methods. Quantitative, the word comes from the word quantity, quantity meaning numbers, and the idea here is that we can transform social information, social facts, into numbers that we can measure. We can measure someone's age, we can measure their income, we can maybe rank the various occupations to measure things like class or status. We could do an experiment and measure how racist people are by whether they are prepared to help people depending on their skin color or ethnicity. So the 2 main types of quantitative research that we do, though there's a few more that we're going to get to, but the 2 big ones are surveys and experiments. It turns out that surveys tend to be done by sociologists and experiments get done by psychologists, but it's not an absolute rule. But these are the 2 main methods. Okay, so what I've talked about here there is about qualitative versus quantitative, and I've talked about methods that basically involve collecting data from real living human beings. There are a whole series of other methods that are out there, ways of basically collecting and analyzing data that actually don't involve humans directly. They involve what we call artifacts. And there are two main methods here. One is the sort of method of comparative, which is a comparative social science, which is very much the domain of political science. So you'll see lots and lots. If you study political science, you'll see comparisons between nations and states. These are a classic example of comparative studies. They may say, why did certain countries develop and others not? Why did the Asian tigers like Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Korea develop, but Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, etc., not develop? That's a comparative study. That would be a comparative study between many countries with different outcomes. And when we do comparative research, often what we are doing is this concept of what's called a natural experiment, where rather than an experiment where we put someone in a lab and then half of them we give a stimulus and half of them we don't, in natural experiment, history tends to give the stimulus, right? And we need to try and understand why, what its consequences are. So that's one way of using artifacts, one method that uses artifacts. Another one, which is pretty classic, is historical and documentary research. So in this case, your primary raw materials will be things like documents from, say, government archives. There could be faxes. There could even be newspaper articles. They could be the archives of some rich and famous person who's, put their stored their after they've died, their papers have been stored somewhere. And one of the key methods we use to analyze documentary data is called content analysis, and it turns out there's both a qualitative and a quantitative way to do this. You can qualitatively study documentary analysis by or study documents or do documentary analysis by looking at things like themes in them. So what are the repeated ideas that come up, and that tends to be very qualitative. Or you can do counts of things. You can say, how many times did articles about a particular issue appear on the front page of the newspaper? Or how many words were dedicated? And these are you can get numbers from this. So anyway, we're going to spend about 4 or 5 weeks learning most of these different methods. And the key thing, I guess, at this stage is just for you to know that what you can see in front of you on these slides is kind of the main how would I put it? It's basically the main approaches to collecting data across the social sciences. You see here in front of you almost everything that people will do. Not quite absolutely everything, but probably 90% of what would appear in academic papers in the social sciences will use one of these methods. Okay, so we've done design. In this second part, the second step of doing a research project is called data collection. Now, we're not going to go into this in a lot of detail now, but I want to touch on 2 really important things to do with data collection that we're going to learn about. One of them is about sampling. So simply, sampling is the idea that that when we try to do analysis of the world, we can't survey absolutely everyone in Australia or absolutely everyone in our community. So instead, we survey a small number of them, a sample, and try to make that representative. Well, we're going to learn about all the different ways that you can do that and all the principles of it. And it's really important because you can't really make decisions without conducting sampling, without having good sampling methods. The other thing we're going to learn about under data collection, which we've mentioned already, is ideas like operationalization and measurement. So how do we actually measure, how do you measure class? I mean, that's an example. How do you measure social class, right? Now, do you just measure income? But what about wealth? Okay, well, yeah, wealth. So what about education? Oh, that too. What about the fact that maybe someone is held in high esteem but they don't have any money or wealth, like a priest? Where does that fit? Well, we're going to learn about all the different ways of, or many of the different ways of operationalizing concepts, and it will be. I think you'll find it quite fascinating. Okay, the third part of research, once you've got your data, once you've designed your study, collected your data, you need to analyze it. And I'm going to do this very, very quickly. We're not going to talk about all this now, but very briefly, there is quantitative and qualitative, as we've talked about before, analyzing text and numbers. For quantitative, analyzing numbers, we can think about four main ways of doing the analysis. Many of them you kind of have a sense of already, but we can think of what's called univariate, which means one number. So we might look at things like a mean and a standard deviation of a variable. We can also look at things like bivariate, which means two variables, the correlation between two variables. Does gender give rise to differences in pay? We know that it does. That is a correlation. Or we could compare the means of men and women, and that would be a form of bivariate analysis. After bivariate, there is the most one of the most advanced methods, or I guess the most advanced set of methods, called multivariate analysis. And we're going to learn about one main approach, which is called regression, and two types of that, linear and logistic. I won't go into what it means, but I can explain the core idea here with multivariate analysis, and this is why it's so powerful, is that often you can't take just a correlation and be sure that that is what's driving it, because often there are third factors. I tell students when they are designing their projects, what is someone going to say when you go to them and tell them what you found when you're in a pub, right? Or you tell your friend or your mum. I'll tell you what happens, because I've had this experience many times. The person turns to you and says, yeah, but what about blah? And they pull something out completely out of left field, and you're stumped. An example of this might be you may find a correlation between gender and pay, but someone may say, what about the fact education? Maybe women have got less education than men. And then someone else at the pub will say, but maybe women have just got less experience because they give birth and they get pregnant and they got years outside of the labor force. Maybe that's what's driving it. Well, it turns out when you've got all these multiple variables that could drive one outcome, one dependent variable, in this case income, you need to somehow put them all together in a model so you can control for all the other theories, all the other particular factors that could be driving things. And that's what we're going to learn to do with multivariate analysis and regression. We get to have, say, a model of how much do people earn, and we can look at the effect of gender, the effect of education, the effect of how many children you've had and whether you were out of the labor force or not, and much more complicated models. Okay, and then the fourth type of quantitative analysis that is done, and it's a bit different, is this idea of looking for dimensions or clusters. So it turns out that while some things are easily categorizable as causes and effect, right? Gender causes differences in income. It's definitely not the other way around. If you're paid more, you don't start to become a man or become a woman, generally speaking. So in that case, causality is very clearly from, gender to income, or maybe there's a third factor that's driving it. But in other things, in other parts of society and social phenomena, things tend to cluster. So if we think about fashion, we notice that certain types of items of clothing tend to go together, and it's not really clear which causes what. The whole hipster outfit, I don't know what it is. Is it tight black jeans and beards and sort of weird but kind of cool clothing? And what is it, those beanies and things like that? These sort of all come together as a package, right? Similarly to the way that black clothes seem to come together as a package in people, in certain groups of people, and what we do with in this whole area of analysis, which we'll go into much more detail around when we get there, is look at ways of identifying when a whole series of variables are moving together. To use a more serious example, there's a cluster around education, income, and wealth that tends to move together, right? Which is broadly the idea of class. Or if I did a survey set questions with you and asked you 6 different questions about how depressed you are, how anxious you are, how much you fidget, how much you found it difficult to do work, and a whole lot of other mental health questions, well, people's answers on one scale will tend to predict their answers on another, and they will tend to cluster together. Not absolutely, and we're going to learn about how to identify what those clusters are and see if they really exist or not. As part of this quantitative analysis, what we're going to cover is we're going to also have to learn some software. There are 2 types that we're going to you're going to be able to choose between. You're going to get to do basically the same course or the same learning, but either with SPSS or with R. These are the names of the 2 softwares. There's the big difference between the 2 of them is that SPSS is broadly easy to use and super expensive, and R is completely free but is a bit more difficult to use. The SPSS, to give you an idea, the most basic, a student license I think is only about $70, but for a year license, for a commercial package, you're looking at $1,000, between $1,000 and $10,000 per year, depending on what packages you need within SPSS. And so that expense limits when you can use it, who can use it, and so forth. R, on the other hand, is open source, but while SPSS is feels a lot like, say, Word, it's got menus and so forth, menu-driven and so forth. R, you have to type out the commands, and that can be pretty frustrating for people. So, moving right along, the other type of analysis that we will do is qualitative analysis. With this, the key thing you do when you do qualitative analysis is look for themes. Look for recurring ideas, recurring concepts, recurring patterns within the words or pictures you're analyzing. We're going to learn about some different types of software, similar to how we do with R and SPSS with quantitative methods. We'll briefly look at in vivo and deduce, but we'll also, I think we need to recognize that often qualitative analysis can be very easily done with Microsoft Word or even a pen and paper and a highlighter. And that's not to devalue it, it's just simply, there are tools for different types of work, and sometimes you should just use the simple tools. They work the best. Okay. The fourth and last part of doing research, and I should say that the analysis that I just discussed, we basically spend 1 week on qualitative analysis and about 3 weeks on quantitative analysis this semester. As we're going around this circle, we're really going through the weeks of the class. In the last week before you do presentations, I'm going to teach you a full class on how to write academic articles, but actually we're going to learn this throughout the semester. Techniques for good writing, what are the different parts of an academic paper, what are the ways that you do a quantitative paper well, what are the ways you do a qualitative paper well. We'll learn about all those things. Won't go into it now, but it's something to look forward to. Okay, so that's the structure of research, and in a sense that's an overview of what we're going to be doing in the course this year. The next bit I want to talk about is the actual structure of today of the course overall. And when we do this, I'm going to go through basically 4 parts. I'm going to briefly talk about the main classes that we're going to have, which is, I'm not going to dwell on it because again, it basically is what we've just gone over then. Then talk through what content you're going to have to work with and how it's going to be delivered. Then we'll go through the assessments and then talk through about what the timetable is going to be for the project and the sort of work you need to do each week. So let's go through it. Remember that I said that we are going to basically follow this pattern that follows the way that a project works. It goes from design to data collection to analysis to writing up. Well, again, the semester is broadly organized in that sort of a structure. So the first 4 weeks, we go through a whole lot of design issues. We do 1 week in week 5 of analysis. That's simply to give you a bit of a flavor of where you're going to get to at the end, to get you some of those skills early on so that you can be thinking ahead. And then we're going to go back to doing more design. We go through, so in week 3 we do field work, interviews and focus groups. Week 4 we do surveys and sampling. Week 6 we do the experiment. And then in week 8 we do historical comparative research. In week 7, just before the Easter break, we are going to go through you're going to present your research proposals, which is good because once you've done those, you can then start collecting data. After the break and after doing historical comparative research, we're going to do 3 weeks of analysis, 1 on qualitative data, 2 more on quantitative data. And in the last week before your final project presentations, we're going to talk about how to write, basically. So that's it. That's what you've got to look forward to. So the content for the course, there is content like we're going through right now. What form is that going to take? Well, these are the, I guess, six forms it takes. There are the readings, which are already in the unit guide, though I might change them a little bit. I apologize in advance, but it's just life. There's going to be video lectures like the one that you're listening to now. I'm also going to, as much as possible, try to give you a transcript and the slides of this video lecture at the same time or a day or 2 after the video lecture itself. That's because I've found a very easy way to do it. It's pretty cheap and very high quality. So basically with a computer. And then we're also going to, so the other things are there's a weekly quiz, and I'm also going to give you, which is examinable. I'm also going to give you a concept list. So I know it's going to feel overwhelming as you do this course. There's just so many terms. But so one of the things I'm going to do to kind of cut you a deal, make your life a bit easier, is to say, look, actually, every week there'll be between 5 and 15 concepts. and they're ultimately the only things you'll be examined on for the quizzes and for the final exam. So focus on those. The rest of it, enjoy, learn, but don't get overwhelmed by the massive content that sort of is inevitable at some level with a course like this. And then I'm also going to give you an exercise sheet, which will have the exercises for each week. Now, my ideal is that I'm going to post this by Sunday night. Now, it is now Monday in the first week, so I haven't achieved that in week 1. But hopefully the teething difficulties are over, and I'll be able to get you these well in advance of hopefully at least by Sunday night each week. Let's just go through these a little bit and go through them quickly. So the readings are in the unit guide. They may change it slightly each week. The core textbook is Newman. I think it's called it's the Pearson International Edition, but actually the first and second editions are both actually identical, so just get either one. The thing is that Pearson, the publisher, doesn't import this textbook to Australia, so instead you can either try and buy secondhand online. You could buy it from Amazon, but again it's going to be expensive as a paper copy, or you could buy the Kindle ebook for about $40. I can send you the link. I'll try and post it onto the discussion. I've already posted onto some of the discussion lists already. So that's Newman. That's the core textbook. For weeks 10 and 11, we are going to, and also when we generally do SPSS and R, there is this textbook called Discovering Statistics. There's a version for SPSS and there's a version for R. So Discovering Statistics using SPSS and Discovering Statistics using R. And it's been ordered for the Co-op Bookshop. I don't know if it's arrived. You can also buy it on Amazon as a Kindle ebook. It's really for later in semester and also as a bit of an assistant to you. But anyway, that's that. Some weeks there are actually going to be online readings or websites. So actually next week, for example, there's a textbook chapter on ethics, but actually what I'm going to get you to do and really require of you is to go and do the ethics training on the ethics training website of Macquarie University. That has some quizzes that you do, and if you complete that, then that will kind of count both as your reading and your quiz for the week. And we really need you to do that because we are doing really serious proper data collection in this class, and the actual ethics committee of Macquarie University needs to know that you've been trained. In week 5, another website will be used. It's called methods101.com, which we've been developing here at Macquarie Uni, and it includes training on SPSS or R. You get to choose. There will be each week of, as I've already mentioned, the video lecture, which will be 1 to 2 hours with these mind maps and the lecture. I'd like to get feedback from you to see whether these are working for you or not, so let me know. Hopefully also a transcript and slides. There'll be the quiz and the concept list. As I said, the concept list is basically examinable concepts from the readings and video lecture. It's a contract between you and me that the quiz and the final exam will only ask about these concepts. Now, the quiz, because I've got this stuff out late, and because it's week 1 and no one's switched their brain on yet, reasonably, the first week's quiz is not actually due until the second week, and the second week's quiz is also due in the second week. So in week 2, both week 1 and week 2 are due. After that, we will, continue with week 3 being due in week 3, week 4 being due in week 4. Now, what I really want to do with these quizzes, they'll be on iLearn, and what I want to do is, well, what I'm going to require is that everyone has to do them by 1 p.m. on the Wednesday of class. So week 2s are due in week 2 Wednesday. Week 3s are due in week 3 Wednesday. The reason for this is twofold. 1 p.m. on Wednesday is the first internal class for this course, and I really want to use the quiz as a way to incentivize you to do the readings and to do these lectures, so that when people come to class it's worthwhile. And also I want to review the answers to the quiz. It turns out that looking through the answers to the quiz in the lecture for the internal students makes a really big difference in just being able to learn what you know and what you don't know, where you're having trouble and where things are working. So that's the weekly quiz. It does mean that I understand there's a pretty short window between Sunday night and Wednesday lunch. It's really 2 evenings, a Monday and Tuesday, for the external students who've got jobs during the week. So I know that's going to be a bit tight, and if it really is a major problem, I'll try and think about some way of adapting it. I'm not really sure how at this stage, but I'll be sending out a survey to you all in the next week or so, just to get some feedback on what you think of the structure of the course and what you'd like to keep and change. And in that, if that's a real problem for you, then I'd ask you to comment on it. Last thing in terms of the content that will go up is the exercise sheet. So this is 1 to 2 exercises. Internal students will try to do both of them in class because we've got about 3 hours. External students and OUA, and actually internal students who miss class, will pick one of those exercises to do and to post their answer on iLearn, and that will count as your participation. That will be due at the end of the week, so at basically midnight or just before midnight on Monday morning, the end of Sunday evening, at the end of the week. And that's mostly for the external and OUA. That's your sort of alternative to coming to class, and a chance for you to apply the ideas from the class. Okay, so we're doing the structure of the course, and now we're going to move over to assessment. So what's the assessment? You've probably read the unit guide, so I won't dwell on this, but basically, and a lot of it we've already covered. There is the weekly quiz, which is worth 30% overall. You can miss 2 weeks of that quiz and they won't count, and if you do it for 2 weeks and do badly, they will not count as well. Only your worst 2 quiz weeks will not count. And that's basically to allow you to miss class for whatever reasons, whether it's sickness or not, or just busyness, without feeling too anxious about it. They will be on iLearn, and as I've said, they're due at 1 p.m. every Wednesday, but not this week, not week 1, because I'm late. The assessment for the next assessment is participation. That is basically coming to class for internal students and participating actively in the exercises we do there. For external students and OUA and internal students who miss class, that is your posting on iLearn your answers to the exercise. We've already talked about that. In terms of the other aspect, which I've only touched on briefly, is the project. So you're going to do a group project for this course. It'll be in groups of 5 to 7 students, and it will involve data collection. I'll talk about it more in a second, but basically that project has 2 phases. One is design, and the second one is data collection, analysis, and write-up. The design of the study is due in week 7, and the way that will work is that I will have a 1-hour meeting with each group, and if you are an external student, you will Skype into it, and if you are a internal student, you should try and turn up unless there's an incredibly good reason, but it's basically compulsory. And in that 1 hour marking consultation, which will be separate and outside of class, it'll just be me and the group. You'll give an 8-minute presentation summarizing your proposal. You'll hand over a 3,000 word proposal, which I'll give you a very clear structure for. And then I will listen to the presentation, read your proposal, ask questions, and give you a grade, actually, at the time, and hopefully approve the project to go ahead. I really need to do this because Macquarie takes ethics very seriously, and also it's just about making sure you do quality work. And it also, I think, works as a learning opportunity for you because it will be real 1-to-1 or a 1-to-5, for 1-to-6, 1-to-7 feedback on your work face to face. And I've got to say that I find face to face feedback, it can feel confronting to students, but it generally is incredibly powerful and incredibly useful. So I think that will be a good experience. You will then also in class, and I'm going to try and do this for the external students as well, we'll Skype you in, but give an 8-minute presentation, that same 8-minute presentation in class on the Wednesday or Friday of week 7. That's not really gradable, but it is definitely exciting and interesting and useful to everyone else. And it is an expected part of the course. At the end of week 7, and after you've done all those written the proposals and presentations, I'm going to get you to do peer review of each other online. And the idea of that, and this is one of the big issues, I know students hate group projects, or at least Macquarie students do. At my previous university, everyone did it and actually got really good at it. But here I know that there's a lot of anxiety around it. It's like, what if my group mates suck, etc. And there are lots of answers to that, but the big one I'm going to say to you is that half of both of these assessments is not dependent on anyone but you. So for the proposal, 10% of the mark is a group allocated, 10% of the mark, of your final mark, is allocated to you for your individual efforts. And your individual efforts will be judged by the peer review, so what comments and grading your colleagues in your group give you. And secondly, I will be asking you to specify at the beginning of your report and also in your presentations who did what work. And on the basis of that, I will be, if you're the one who's in charge of the literature review and the literature review sucks, then your grade's going to be lower than everybody else's. If, on the other hand, you're in charge of designing the survey and it's a beautiful survey, then great. You're going to be you're going to get a higher mark than the rest of your group. We basically repeat that again in week 13 with the final project report. It's the same structure, not a lot to say about it, except I will say this. We have collaborators for this project. I'm collaborating with, or at least consulting with, academics and non-government organizations, people who are academics from other universities like UTS and UNSW, who are real experts in this area. I've invited them to come to your project proposals and final report to come and sit in. I'll invite colleagues from Macquarie. I'm also going to invite some people who are part of the sector, so people who are, for example, working at trade unions and doing research to come along. If they do come along, I'll have them as, guest graders or such, and they can tell you what you do well and badly. My experience when we've done that is it's made it a lot more real, a lot more powerful, a lot more meaningful for you to know that your work is going to be heard and listened to by people who do this as a day job and who really are very familiar with these topics. The last thing is the final exam. It's worth 30%. It's going to be very similar to the weekly quizzes, which is good. I think, because the format you'll be relatively familiar with. It's worth 30% of overall, and the real purpose of that final exam is to make sure that you have an incentive to get on top of the core concepts within this class. The reality is that if you don't get on top of those core concepts are foundational to almost all the rest of your university study, and so it's important you get on top of them. Okay, so the structure of the course. The last bit I want to just run through, and I guess this is actually already clear, but just sort of pulling all what we've just said together, but instead as a timetable or a timeline. So each week, on a Sunday night, I'm going to post the readings and lecture and transcript and quiz and concept list and exercise sheet. By Wednesday at 1 p.m., I'm going to expect everyone to have completed the quiz on iLearn. In class, then, on Wednesday and Friday, internal students will do the exercises. Anytime outside class, each week, I want you to have a weekly group project meeting, face-to-face or Skype. Note, when you use Skype, I think that collaborations really require you to have a Google Doc open that you're all logged into at the same time. That, I think, ends up making online meetings almost better than face-to-face meetings in my experience, but let's let you judge that. And then on Sundays each week, at the end of that week, beginning of the next week, I need external and OUA and internal students who miss class to post their 300-word exercise answer on iLearn. And also, I'm going to ask, and this is one per group, so this update is not every person, it's just each group, to post a 300-word project update on iLearn. This is so that we can all see the progress that you're taking. I can comment on your progress, and it can be a way that I can be, in a sense, providing immediate feedback and advice and making sure you're on the right track throughout the course of the semester. So that's the timetable weekly. And then overall for the project, again, we've discussed most of this, but there's a few little bits here that we haven't. One is week one. In week one, I want you to form groups. Basically, if you know people and you want to form a group with your friends, happy for you to do that. If it needs to be 5 to 7, I would ideally like them to be 6 people, or simply to keep the number of groups manageable. There are 150 students in this class. I want you to, if you have formed a group and you've got that list, send that list to myself and to Ryan, who is the tutor for the course. If you don't have a group, then you can do one of two things. You can post a call for groups on the iLearn discussion, just general one, and say, hey, I don't have a group. Does anyone else want to form a group? And you can have a conversation on there. Or you can, if that sounds a bit scary for you, you can just email myself and Ryan, and we'll allocate you to a group. But I really want that to happen by the end of this week. I want everyone in a group and everyone to have had their first meeting by the end of this week, very latest at the beginning of next week. Okay, then weeks 2 to 6, you design your project. That means weekly group meetings outside of class and the 300-word weekly updates on iLearn, one per group. Week 7, we have the presentations and marking consultation. That's we've discussed that already a lot. There's then a 2-week break for Easter, and in that I want you to be doing a lot of data collection, and also in weeks 8 and 9. You should be continuing the weekly group project meetings and reports. In weeks 10 to 12, you should be doing data analysis and write-up, and again, sending through weekly updates and meeting with your group as and when necessary. And then week 13, as we've already discussed, you will be presenting to me and to the class. Okay, that is the project. Now, I'm just going to go through some of the very important sections on iLearn and the unit guide. This is just to, I guess, to just make sure that we're all on the same page for these things. So, for the group project, most of this has been said, but let's just look at this bit here. As part of the study, all groups must collect either survey data, 25 surveys or experiments per team member, or interview data, 5 in-depth interviews, or documentary data, say 50 documents such as newspaper articles per team member. Now, that has changed slightly because of the intervention of Macquarie University Ethics Committee. They basically think that you guys are not responsible enough to do interviews, or there's too many dangers around doing in-depth interviews, both to yourself and to potentially the participants. So instead, your choices are between the survey and the documentary data. My strong preference is for everyone to do surveys, though you don't have to. And the requirement is going to be a 2-page survey, and it's going to need to include both quantitative and qualitative questions, so some open-ended questions. And you will be doing the survey by surveying people you don't know. You could go and survey people at the university who you don't know, or at train stations, or on the street, or in food courts, etc. But basically, each of you should, over the course of those 2 to 4 weeks of data collection, do about 25 surveys. You're then got to analyze that data, and 3, you've got to get ethical approval in writing from me before you start data collection. So that's just a real big warning. You can't start your study until you have finished the project proposal and met with me in week 7. Cannot. You can pick a topic. I want you to pick a topic within the general theme of experiences of work for low-wage workers. But I want to give you a very recent reading from 2018 by a very famous academic from the US called Nancy Fraser. And she's proposed some pretty core theoretical ideas or explanations for our modern period and the mistreatments of low-wage workers. And I want to suggest that is a really good place for you to start and try and pick one of her claims, one of her theories, as something that you can test. So that's it. It's not absolutely compulsory. I'd prefer you to do something you're inspired by and interested in. And if you can't find it there, then feel free to skip that. But let's try to keep it within the area of researching low-wage workers and their experiences at work. One of the questions you might have is, what is a low-wage worker? Well, there's no straightforward definition. You could put people on a minimum wage, which is going to be most students. It certainly was me when I was a student. But it also can be, I would say, anyone below the median income. And you could, which would be less than about $70,000 a year. So yeah, but it's a very broad topic, and that is not a serious constraint at this stage. Okay. I think I am not going to stick with this, but just note that there is detailed requirements for the assessment. And then also note that what I've already talked about, that your marking is allocated, half of them for group marks, half of them for individual marks. There is also in the outline a grading criteria. This is so that when you're writing your proposal, when you're writing your final report, keep coming back to this. I've written these 5 points. It's so that you can look at it and you can say, am I writing something that's going to get an A or a HD? and a HD will do all these things, and a D will do most of these things pretty well. So keep coming back to it, keep looking at it, and using it as a real touchstone for deciding whether your proposal is really and report is really sharp. Okay, we've actually already talked about the participation and exercises. The one thing I'd say is that if you have 100% attendance, if you have 100% participation in the exercises on OUA, on the iLearn, sorry, then expect to get 7 out of 10, which is a credit, right? The 3 additional marks will be allocated for showing really something more, clear understanding, application of the concepts, high quality work, participating in thoughtful engagements with other students or other students' contributions, commenting on other students' contributions. So this is a really crucial how do I put it? This is a really crucial thing for you to understand when you're doing your exercises. Okay, nearly done. The readings. So these are the understanding research. Any edition of it will probably do. I don't think the very brand new super 3rd edition that is got a very weird electronic format. I don't know exactly what that's like, so try to get the 2nd or 1st edition. They're basically the same thing. There is a cheap book called Elements of Style, which you can get for about $10 to $15, I think, at most good bookstores. It is a very short, brilliant book written about 80 or 90 years ago that teaches you how to write like a really professional journalist or nonfiction writer. Get it. We're going to be using it in the last week of semester, but you should be reading it every day of your life if you can. And then, as we've already discussed, there are the 2 different textbooks you can pick: Discovering Statistics Using R and Discovering Statistics Using SPSS. There are also some recommended books, but these are just these are not absolutely necessary. By far, definitely not necessary. This explains a little bit more about which software you might choose. I'm not going to dwell on it. One thing to note is that really there aren't really late submissions for any assessments for this class. The exercises are due when they're due, the online quizzes are due when they're due, and the group projects are due when they're due. The weekly exercises, one of the reasons that they are due when they're due is that you can't see other students' postings until you have made them, and I need everyone to make the posts so that you're not just copying each other's answers. Okay, unit convener. Yeah, this is me. This is what I look like. These are my contact details. The big thing to say is that I've given my mobile number there. It's a freakish mobile number, 911-666. It was really just what Aldi Mobile gave me. It was random, but at some level very cool, at some level very weird, and definitely relatively easy to remember. I've given you my number. Feel free to WhatsApp me. It's my preferred form of communication. The email, of course, is also completely fine as well. Macquarie or the Gmail, things go through the Gmail a little bit faster than the Macquarie, but whatever. And there's my Skype ID. The teaching assistant is Ryan King. He's a 2nd year master's student in sociology. Lovely guy doing a thesis on low wage workers in Australia as well. Hopefully you'll get to meet him at some stage during this semester, either in person or online. Okay, and I think that's it. That's the end of the lecture, or end of the first lecture. I hope this has been useful, and I look forward to meeting you in person or online. And don't forget to do the 2nd lecture for week 1, which is actually the lecture on the content of this week, which is about choosing a topic. Okay, thanks very much. Bye.